How's it, guys? Welcome back. Bonzelo here for another geo lesson. I hope you're ready for this. Got your pens, pencils, making notes. Obviously, we need to do this so that you can pass your prelim well as your final examination. I just want to thank Liberty for this opportunity to bring this episodes to you at your home. And do me a favor, go and follow the Tenfold education app. No, so you don't need your TV, you can get your cell phone, you can use your tablet, whatever. Easiest way, okay. So we got a bunch of questions from Mandla, excellent questions. Really liked these questions because it's questions that is definitely going to pop up in your prelim exams as well as your final exams. And I want you to take note, especially with the climate questions, okay? Vitally important, because what this examiner tried to do with the questions that Mandla sent me is he tried to trick you, okay? So what we're going to have a look at these questions. I want you to pay attention, especially how the questions been asked, okay? Very importantly, read your questions carefully, okay? Let's get straight into it. So Mandla provided us with a question regarding hurricanes. And there's two tips that I want to add over here. First of all, hurricane. And the second tip, if you look at the question, Caribbean Sea. Okay, so if you look at the question, the following diagram shows the passage of a hurricane in the Caribbean Sea. Now, immediately, even before we look at the diagram itself, you need to pick up, now, what do we call tropical cyclones in the Northern Hemisphere? Okay, we call them different names depending where we are. Now, hurricanes is usually, we refer to the Americas, for instance, North America. I'm going to write them down there. That's North America. Okay, us in South Africa, below the equator in the Indian Ocean, we refer to them as tropical cyclones. Asian countries refer to them as typhoons. And lastly, Australia, always different, willy willies. Okay. So this is the name for tropical cyclone. So immediately, when you picked up if you look at the question, they asked you about a hurricane. Now, immediately you need to know it's a tropical cyclone. And another tip is the Caribbean Sea. Where do we find the Caribbean Sea? It's close to the equator in the Americas. It's between South America and North America. Okay, vitally important. But there's a couple of things, and we're coming back to the concepts regarding these tropical cyclones. We need to know the movement that's taking place because there's a difference of movement in the southern hemisphere comparison to the northern hemisphere. So that's what the examiner tried to do over here. Try to confuse you, right? Because we're all too familiar with tropical cyclones, the movement of it. So if we look at tropical cyclones, it's a low pressure system, correct? But what do we know? If we look at the southern hemisphere, the circulation of air of a low pressure system is clockwise. The circulation of air in the northern hemisphere is anti-clockwise. Okay, vitally important. Now, let's go and focus on the diagram that's been given to us. Now, there's a couple of tips, pointers that can help you out. They've mentioned Mexico. You can see the United States of America. So immediately, if you think of the United States of America and Mexico, it's in the northern hemisphere. There's a country known as Cuba, and there's Jamaica. Now, right there with the isobars shaped, perfectly round shaped isobars, immediately we can identify it as a tropical cyclone or a hurricane. But pay attention to the perfectly round shaped isobars. Okay. Because we're in the northern hemisphere, the circulation of air is going to be anti-clockwise. Vitally important. Okay. Now remember, the equator is roughly somewhere here. Okay. Now, the movement of this tropical cyclone is going to be from east to west. Okay, as you can see. Why? Because it moves in the tropical easterlies. But very importantly over here, look at the isobar spacing in the northeastern quadrant. Very close to one another. So what do we know? If the isobars are close to one another, we experience very strong winds. Okay. When the isobars are far from one another, is gentle winds. Now, I've mentioned this before, great fellas. This is not a nice storm whatsoever. You don't want to get stuck into a tropical cyclone or a hurricane. Okay. Massive storms. We're talking about storm surge. What is storm surge? It's the wavelength that increases as it makes landfall. We're talking about torrential rain. Just to give you an example, Johannesburg roughly over a year on average experienced 600 to 700 millimeters of rain per year. With a tropical cyclone or hurricane, that amount of rainfall can fall over 48 hours. That's a lot of rain over a very short period of time. Okay, nothing nice about the storm whatsoever. Now, pay attention to the isobar reading. Now, if you look at the hurricanes and tropical cyclones, we know that the pressure is well below 1,000 hectopascal. Okay, extremely low pressure system that happens. Now, from a synoptic point of view, what will a tropical cyclone or hurricane looks like? Similar to that, but from a synoptic point of view, perfectly shaped around isobars, and very importantly, we have a symbol that represents the eye. Okay, that's known as the eye of the hurricane. Now, when this tropical cyclone, when it develops from a tropical cyclone, if it moves from a tropical storm and it matures to a tropical cyclone, I'm referring to a tropical cyclone, but you need to keep in mind it's also known as a hurricane, typhoon, and willies. As soon as it matures to a tropical cyclone or hurricane, we give it a name. Let's assume this name is Elsa. Okay, my daughter's going to love that because of Frozen, but anyway. If you look at Elsa, what does the Elsa mean, the name mean? So we name tropical cyclones according to the alphabet. So we know how many happens during the season. So if you look at it, Elsa, E is A, B, C, D, E. So it means it's going to be the 5th tropical cyclone for the season. Okay, so we're giving them names to see how many happens during the season. Okay, now pay attention once again. Anti-clockwise circulation is experienced over here. Why anti-clockwise? Because we are in the southern hemisphere. Apologies, the northern hemisphere. Now, once again, as you can see, very importantly, they can't form between, I just want to make that note, if you look at the formation, hurricanes and tropical cyclones can't form between 0 and 5 degree latitudes. The reason for it is not enough Coriolis force. Okay, so it's always 5 degrees away from the equator. Now, let's just quickly focus on the questions that's being asked over here. Now, I pointed out, if you look at 1.3, the following diagram shows the passage of a hurricane in the Caribbean Sea. If you look at 1.3.1, in which hemisphere can this hurricane be found? Now, the name is a dead giveaway, only in the northern hemisphere. I'm just going to write there, NH. Okay, now question 1.3.2. What is the difference between a tropical storm and a tropical cyclone? Okay, there's a couple of things that happens over there. Now, when we look at tropical storms and tropical cyclones, we have an initial stage, we have an immature stage, we have a mature stage, and we have a dissipated stage. Okay, these are the 4 different stages of a tropical cyclone. The initial stage is when the storm develops. Okay, so we can just revise, even though it's not in the question, but it's quite important. We need conditions that need to persist at least for 3 to 4 days. Now, first of all, when do we experience these storms? Usually late summer, early autumn. Okay, because think of this. Think of a car. It's basically warm ocean waters is the fuel for the storm. Okay, for this storm to develop, one of the most important resources is warm ocean temperatures above 27 degrees Celsius. So that's what we need to have in the initial stage. So I'm going to write it down there. And please don't make the mistake that many matrics make. It's warm ocean temperatures. You need to remember that you're mentioning ocean temperatures. Okay, of above 27 degrees Celsius. High humidity. Okay, lots of evaporation. Okay, and once we have that, we get rising air, and this is how the low pressure system develop. Okay, so we got rising air, evaporation taking place, cloud formation taking place. We're talking about cumulus clouds building up. Okay, and because of the Coriolis force, depending in which hemisphere we are, because it's rising air, the circulation is going to be clockwise in the southern hemisphere, anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere. That's the reason we can't form between 0 and 5 degrees, because it needs that Coriolis force, the movement in the trade wind belt. Okay, so the immature stage, we call it a tropical storm, like in the question. Now, what's the difference between the mature stage and the immature stage? The tropical storm, the pressure is still, okay, close to 1,000 hectopascal. Okay, we got strong winds, up to 120 kilometers per hour. Okay. Now, the difference between the immature stage and mature stage is 2 things. Okay, the pressure drops well below 1,000 hectopascal. I think the lowest pressure ever recorded was something like 870, but well below 1,000 hectopascal. We give it a name. And we can also mention winds exceeding 120 kilometers per hour. Okay. Now, I can just as well mention the dissipated stage. Now, for instance, especially, I just want to clear our diagram over here. Now, especially if you look at this section of the Americas, as you can see, you got the United States over there, that's land. You got Mexico situated over there. So this is the Gulf of Mexico. As you can see, this is ocean. There's the islands, Caribbean islands of Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba. So what tends to happen, this tropical cyclone move, okay, warming up, especially in this Gulf of Mexico, this ocean over here, the Gulf of Mexico experienced quite warm ocean temperatures. So it fuels this tropical cyclone to become enormous, to become extremely strong. Gale force winds up to 160 kilometers per hour. Okay, but as the system moves west, it makes landfall. Okay, and soon as it makes landfall, it kind of starts to dissipate. Okay, what does dissipating mean? It's dying out. The simple reason is because it's not moving over the ocean anymore. And I've mentioned to you a couple of minutes ago that the ocean temperatures, the physical ocean, is the fuel for the storm. Okay, So if it can't move over warm ocean waters, it's going to dissipate. It's going to die out. Okay. So eventually, and what happens, if this is the equator situated over here, what happens with temperatures if we move away from the equator? Temperatures decrease. Okay. I mean, all the way from 0 degree up to 90 degree, the polar regions ice cold. Okay, we experience much colder temperatures at the polar regions. So the theory goes, it's not a theory, it's plain and simple. When you move towards the equator, temperatures increases. When you move away from the equator, temperature decreases. Same with ocean temperature, same as land temperature. Okay, so as this tropical cyclone, this hurricane moves away from the equator, over continents, it dissipates. Okay. So, if you just have a look at this, describe and account for the path taken by the hurricane. As you can see, it moves from east to west. It moves in the tropical easterlies, right? And as you can see, it moves away from the equator. Now, I like this question 1.3.4. Predict, give reasons the course the hurricane will probably take over the next few days. Now, like I've mentioned, it will move from east to west. It probably make landfall with the Americas, with Florida, okay? And it will dissipate. But as soon as it gets to the 50-degree latitude line, what happens? It starts to recurve because we're moving into a different wind belt. But we don't see that too often because once it moves over land, it dissipates. Okay, so this will happen. But while we're at this question, remember, it's usually asked in a paragraph question, and they ask you the impact of tropical cyclones and of hurricanes. Now, I always want you to refer to the following, please. Okay, think of social, environmental, and economical. Okay, these storms have massive implications. Okay, especially for developing countries like Mozambique. Okay, why? Financially not that strong, still developing countries, lack of resources. So if we look at the economical, think of it, houses, infrastructure, destroyed. So physically, people's houses are being washed away. Storm surge because of the wind speeds, etc. Right. Another thing is, imagine you're a farmer in Mozambique. Your whole crop, everything is being destroyed, being flooded. Okay, you can't earn an income. Many people lose their jobs. Unemployment will rise because of the economical consequences of a storm. So people might lose their jobs, farmers might lose their crop. Okay, massive implications. I'm talking roads, railway, everything damaged. Think of water, electricity, the infrastructure for that. All of that will be damaged, right? And unfortunately, when we look at our next point, economical, I've mentioned that, environmental and social. What happens? Because of the immense storm, people, loss of life. Okay, loss of life, loss of livestock. Okay, and family life obstructed. And lastly, we can also mention environmental. Now you can imagine, like I've explained to you a little bit earlier, the amount of rainfall that's being experienced over a very short period of time. Okay, we're definitely going to experience flooding. With the flooding, what happens? Deforestation. But besides for the deforestation, what's going to happen? Soil erosion. Okay, soil is going to be washed away. Can lead to dams silting up. What's silting up? It means when we have more soil in our dams than physical water. Okay, what else can we mention? Pollution. And especially for countries like Mozambique, who experience tropical cyclones and hurricanes, it's usually the after effect of this tropical cyclone. You need to keep in mind, they don't have proper infrastructure, proper housing. Housing are being destroyed. Emergency services struggle to get to the people in need, okay? But it's usually the ripple, we call it the ripple effect. It's the effect afterwards, you know? So once the tropical cyclone has moved over a certain area, it's the after effect, for instance, pollution. And the biggest killer is like bacteria, we call it cholera outbreaks. Okay, and once again, this cholera outbreaks have a negative effect on social consequences. I think if you think of Mozambique, it's a developing country, less doctors, you know, because it's developing, less supporting systems like ambulances, hospitals, emergency care services. Okay, so the death toll can be quite high, especially in developing countries, comparison to America. They have early warning systems. They tend to tell the people to move away, warning systems. They have adequate emergency services. So not a big problem for developed countries, well-developed countries. But 2005, Hurricane Katrina brought America to their knees. So that's the magnitude of these storms. Absolutely nasty. Okay. So, Mandla, I hope this answers your question regarding tropical cyclones.